Not long ago, the India-Canada relationship looked shattered. Decades of diplomatic ties were cracking under the weight of escalating public feuds and severe political standoffs. The breaking point hit when Canadian officials accused Indian agents of being involved in the assassination of separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. Within days, both governments retaliated by expelling high-ranking diplomats, effectively freezing all crucial bilateral trade talks. To the rest of the world, this looked like a permanent stalemate, two major democracies seemingly trapped in an endless diplomatic deep freeze. But quietly, behind closed doors, a pivot was underway. The two nations signed a 24,000 crore rupee uranium supply deal. Shortly after, they set an aggressive new mutual target, pushing their bilateral trade volume to $50 billion. This is geopolitics in its rawest form. Nations operate on practical economic interests and energy needs, not permanent grudges. Reaching that $50 billion trade target required Canada to resolve the primary obstacle in its working relationship with New Delhi. They needed to address India's absolute red line. Canada realized it had to take official action against the domestic extremist factions operating within its borders. This brings us to a recently released public intelligence report by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS. Inside this document, the agency coins a brand new official acronym, CBKE, standing for Canada-based Khalistani Extremists. For the first time, Canadian intelligence explicitly classifies these specific factions as a direct national security threat to Canadian citizens, rather than an overseas headache for the Indian government. By putting this in writing, Ottawa acknowledged that what it previously treated as a foreign grievance is actually a shared domestic security crisis. The report anchors this threat assessment in history, officially acknowledging extremist involvement in the 1985 bombing of Air India Flight 182. With 329 people killed, the vast majority of them Canadian citizens, this remains the deadliest terrorist attack ever carried out in Canadian history. The document details how these networks operate today, leveraging legitimate Canadian institutions to survive. These groups collect funds from unsuspecting community members under false pretenses. Ultimately, those stolen funds are diverted directly to plan violent activities targeting India. By tracking and mapping this financial pipeline, Canada's own intelligence apparatus has validated claims New Delhi has been making for years. Now, to understand India's overall standing in Ottawa, we have to look at the rest of this CSIS report and see how it categorizes other foreign actors. The document outlines massive, systemic intelligence operations being conducted on Canadian soil by the People's Republic of China. The intelligence service details aggressive tactics, like deploying fake job postings on civilian websites to recruit government workers, deliberately aiming to siphon off classified information. When you compare that level of hostile, nationwide sabotage to India's profile in the report, the difference is stark. India's documented activities are narrowly focused on specific separatist factions. Canadian intelligence clearly views India through the lens of a specific, manageable boundary dispute, separating them from state actors actively trying to undermine the nation. Moving forward, the Canadian government is establishing a specific legal boundary. They maintain that peaceful, nonviolent advocacy for a separate state remains legally protected under Canadian freedom of speech. However, those explicitly named as CBKE factions, the violent networks detailed by CSIS, will now be actively targeted to dismantle their platforms and sever their funding. Drawing this hard line between protected speech and actionable terrorism gives both governments a framework to cooperate without violating domestic laws. Looking ahead over the next decade, this compromise paves the way for Canada to become one of India's most vital, reliable energy providers. This renewed relationship rests on hard, pragmatic realism rather than the language of shared diplomatic values. Aligning on a shared definition of domestic extremism was simply the necessary price of global business. By officially firewalling their massive economic future away from fringe violent elements, India and Canada have successfully reset their trajectory, cementing a strategic alliance.